Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the Pakistan-U.S. relations, and interestingly, there's a very strong statement from none other than the Defense Minister, Khwaja Asif Saab, says that PTI sought pardon from the United States. He further added that a documentary record of apology is available, whereas the former Prime Minister accused U.S. to have conspired against his government. We all know when he talks about that. And on the other hand, Washington has categorically rejected the allegations, labeling them as baseless. Now, where are we heading as far as Pak-US relationship is concerned? Now, when we talk about the IMF deal, obviously with the support of the Americans, a lot has been done, a lot more will be done in the future as well. Talking about FATF now, it seems that Pakistan is going to get out of the grey list and will be back in the white list. So, obviously this is only possible when the American support is available as far as the foreign policy is concerned. Now, on the other hand, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab has also felicitated people and government of the United States on their Independence Day, the 4th of July, as we all know. PM looking forward to engage with Biden administration to promote bilateral relations. He further says that Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto lauds recent momentum in the Pak-US engagement on energy, health, security and trade. These are the most important areas which will be discussed in our today's program. And the Foreign Minister also expressed desire to further deepen US-Pakistan ties, particularly through economic cooperation. So now to talk about this, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Dr. Professor Riffat Hussain Saab. He's a strategic analyst, expert on international relations. Dr. Saab, pleasure to have you in the program, sir. Thank you so much for your time. And we have with us on Skype Dr. Niaz Murtaza Saab. He is a political commentator, senior analyst. Thank you very much, Niaz Saab, for your time as well. And we'll also be talking to Kamran Yousaf Saab, senior journalist, anchor person, on the telephone. He is going to join us at around 8:30. But let me start off from you, Dr. Saab. When the Defense Minister says that Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf sought pardon from the United States of America, and he said that documentary record is also available of this apology. Interestingly, the Americans have rejected the allegations, labeling them as baseless. What's going on, sir?
Well, first a couple of things. The statement by our Defense Minister, Khwaja Asif, is very significant because it punctures the entire thesis developed by PTI after Imran Khan lost power through a no confidence vote, that there was a foreign conspiracy backed particularly by United States, and which was implemented through a process of internal change. Now, I have also been looking for evidence to independently corroborate this assertion by our Defense Minister, but I haven't come across any evidence so far. But if the Defense Minister says this and says this in the Parliament, so it must have he must have some kind of evidence to back up his claims. But it's very interesting that PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, as a leadership, has rejected these assertions by Foreign Minister. So one doesn't know which side is speaking the truth. But if one is to go by what the government of the day is saying about this, they must have some clue, otherwise they would not have made that kind of an assertion.
So let's see, sir, what Dr. Niaz Murtaza has to say regarding this. Dr. Saab, if I may put the same question to you, sir, what would be your reaction to it?
Well, it's a fairly strong statement by our Defense Minister. But of course, in Pakistani politics, you can never be sure, until they make the evidence available and put it out in public. You cannot be 100% ensure whether, it's a serious statement or it's just an allegation to embarrass the PTI. Obviously, if saner heads were to prevail within PTI, they would probably, make some overtures, some outreach to the US, because this has been going on now for what, 2 or 3 months now. These very serious allegations that about the US trying to overthrow the PTI government. I think this is quite unprecedented. At least in the recent years, decades, I don't remember any government making these charges against the US. So obviously, the US relationship is very important to us. And if there was really an attempt, then again, the burden is on the PTI to, present that evidence. Where is the evidence that, the US was trying to overthrow the government? One thing is evidence, but, if you even look at...
They always talk about that cipher in which they believe that there was a conspiracy against them.
Well, how can the cipher include evidence? The cipher narrated what happened in a meeting. The only way it could include evidence is that during this meeting, Donald Lu clearly told our ambassador that we are doing a conspiracy against you, and here is the evidence. You can, clip it with your cipher and send it to the Pakistani government. Obviously, nothing like that could have happened. The US is not so stupid to do that. So there is no way that the cipher could include any evidence that would help, convince rational actors that the US was involved in any kind of conspiracy. So it has to be something independent of the cipher. So on the one hand, the PTI doesn't give any evidence of the conspiracy. And then, the government doesn't give any evidence of the fact that, the PTI is trying to make, outreach to the US. So it's a very dicey situation. But this, side is less important, whether the PTI is trying to reach out to the US or not. The main issue still is that, they are going on and, harping about this conspiracy without putting up any evidence, and this is having serious consequences for our relationship with the US.
All right. Now, sir, when we talk about the foreign relations, it is always linked with your internal conditions and the internal politics. They say that your internal politics, in fact, the foreign policy is a reflection of those. Now, interestingly, sir, when we look at the foreign policy now, and the current engagement and the kind of statements that we often see on the television or we read in the papers and otherwise, it seems that there's a confusion brewing. A lot of people do believe that the Americans are so strong that they can actually influence within the domestic politics of Pakistan, which they have, just like what happened in Libya or in Egypt, for that matter in Algeria, Tunisia, or in so many other Muslim countries. They can change the regime whenever they want to, either by force or by changing the regime or through invasion. I mean, these are the certain formulas which they normally use. So looking at those kind of circumstances, and then, if you just kind of dig deeper, you will see that, yes, the Americans can twist your arms through sanctions, through IMF, through World Bank, through Asian Development Bank, and through so many other financial institutions, as well as when it comes to the foreign policy or trade for that matter, sir. So America has that kind of, influence, which is so overwhelming that it can actually do many things without even engaging you at a very high level.
First of all, two things about this conspiracy theory which is being peddled around by PTI. That if America were to hatch a conspiracy against Pakistan, there was no need absolutely for them to be so blatant that they would put it in the form of a cipher or a cable, which is the only evidence that we have of the so-called American intervention. And secondly, as you rightly point out, that America has a whole range, a whole panoply of instruments through which they can exercise their influence. And thirdly, most importantly, in terms of the Pakistan-U.S. bilateral relations, whenever the Americans have tried to change the government, they have always used the GHQ as an instrument to effect that change. So whether you talk about Sikandar Mirza's proclamation of martial law followed by Ayub Khan's coup, and there are so many instances where this kind of a interference has been undertaken by the Americans. So, as far as the relationship between GHQ and Pentagon is concerned, despite the political storm that has been created by PTI alleging American intervention and American conspiracy, that relationship remains intact. And we saw that during the Islamabad security dialogue, when General Bajwa spoke about our interest in trying to take a position vis-a-vis Ukraine. So his position was very, very clear. He said that Russia's intervention or aggression, as he put it, against Ukraine was untenable, was illegitimate, and it will not be recognized by Pakistan. So that is the theme which runs counter to what the PTI has alleged. But then, because we teach international relations and foreign policy, Hilary Putnam is one author who has talked about two-level games. That sometimes governments use the domestic rhetoric to score political points vis-a-vis their opponents, and what they say domestically may not be acceptable internationally, and what is acceptable internationally may not be feasible or may not accord with the needs of the time. So in that context, if we see this, so Imran Khan's revival or resuscitation as the most popular leader has come in the wake of his rhetoric that the Americans are behind it, and the anti-Americanism anti-American sentiment in Pakistan is running very high. So this redounds to the political advantage of the PTI. So they will continue to hop on that theme, and in that narrative, the facts are no longer sacred or facts are no longer important. And consistently, Washington has denied these allegations from day one up till now.
Yeah, exactly. They have given you a certain verdict and they're sticking to it.
Yeah.
But still, again, I mean, that is the only, I would say, area where Imran Khan is trying to capitalize on.
Yes.
And perhaps he still believes that this narrative, it has been very well received by the general public.
Yes, yes. But internationally, it is very damaging, not only in terms of Pakistan's bilateral relationship with Washington, which are quite important, because America today, even today, remains the largest trading partner of Pakistan. American investment is vitally linked to the other stakeholders, the European Union and things like that. So it's not just the United States, because United States, as you rightly pointed out, has a global influence. So when you run foul of the superpower, when you run foul of a global actor, then there are certain costs that you have to pay.
Right. Dr. Niaz, Murtaza, another important factor. Forget about Pakistan for a while. Let's talk about European Union. Even there, so many countries were very much against this war, kind of engagement with the Russians, let me put it this way. So the Ukrainians were well aware that the Russians will attack them. They did. So the Russians, once they attacked, and they were talking about energy sanctions and so much more on them, nothing has happened. The only currency which really gained strength from almost 81 rubles to 51 rubles a dollar, that was Russian currency. Whereas you talk about the Indian currency, honestly speaking, I was surprised and shocked to know that it's hovering around almost 80 rupees from 57 to a dollar. So the case is with so many other European currencies, and many of these countries were not ready to directly engage the Russians, but they had to because of the American influence and perhaps because of the Britishers. Eventually the Germans were just ready to give maybe night vision goggles or some shoes to the Ukrainian soldiers, but they ended up giving a lot. So this was the kind of influence the Americans have. Forget about the rest of the world. I'm talking about European Union, the continent of first world countries. So if that's there, sir, so obviously it means that when we talk about third world countries like Pakistan for that matter, they have that influence. But when we look at India for that matter, nothing is happening on that. If you remember, you must have heard the famous interview of Mr. Shankar, Jay Shankar Saab, about a month ago or perhaps a little more than that, in which he said, well, you know, we have got Russia as a strategic partner, we have got Americans as strategic partners, so they are engaging them both so well. They have created that equilibrium, interestingly, and they are still buying gas from Russia. They have bought S-400 system. Their business defense partners are still the Russians, despite the kind of offers made by the Americans as well. So how do you see this, sir, on European Union? And then again, I mean, looking at India, just one country, but I mean, the Indians, or Narendra Modi seems to be the blue-eyed boy of Mr. Biden.
Well, you know, there's India, and China is also benefiting a lot from this war. But the thing is, you know, that the Chinese-Indian situation is very different from the European Union situation, because, you know, the Chinese and the Indians feel no territorial or physical threat from Russia. So, you know, they can have a meaningful trade relationship with Russia. They don't really have to, you know, join any alliance against Russia. They know Russia is never going to threaten their interest or their territory. But now with the European Union, the situation is very different. And even very different, not just from India and China, but also very different from the US situation, because with the US and Russia, there is hardly any interdependence. There is very little trade between the US and Russia. So the US can afford to be very ferocious against the Russians. It doesn't have the same kind of physical vulnerability against the Russians the way the European Union has. So the European Union on the one hand has, you know, the physical vulnerability, especially countries like, you know, Finland, Sweden, some of the other countries that border Russia or are close to it. And then there is also the fact that there is the economic interdependence because of the amount of energy that they import from Russia. So in a sense, you know, the European Union situation is the most dicey. They cannot be friendly with the Russians, but they cannot even, you know, totally cut off their ties with the Russians. So the place where, you know, this war has had the most negative impact is obviously the European Union. And so they don't know what to do. They obviously, you know, have to scurry back to the US so that the US can give them some, you know, defense protection, then and also some, you know, economic protection. So that's why, you know, you see the European countries quite confused as to how to deal with it. And obviously they are not so, you know, angry, openly expressing their anger at the Russians. They are still trying to balance the situation.
Alright, so we have also been joined in by Kamran Yousaf Saab, senior journalist, senior anchor person. Assalamu alaikum, Kamran. Hello.
Yes, Faisal, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly fine now, sir. Thank you very much for taking out your time and talking to PDV World. Now, this basic question that I've put to my guests earlier, let me put that one to you as well. And that is about one of the statements issued by our defense minister, Khwaja Asif Saab, says that PTI sought pardon from the US. And he said that documentary evidence is also available for this apology. I want your take on this.
Well, if the defense minister is making such a big claim and also saying that the government also has the documentary evidence, so we have no other reason but to accept that. And it is now, of course, up to the PTI to, of course, rebut, you know, these claims. And, of course, that I understand that I've seen statement from the former information minister, Fawad Chaudhry, who actually rejected such claims. But we do hear recently reports that one of the influential PTI member in the United States met with Donald Lu, reportedly, you know, tried to patch up with whatever happened, you know, recently, and particularly the way former Prime Minister Imran Khan accused him for orchestrating, you know, the so-called plan to seek his ouster. But of course, that given the fact that the defense minister is saying that they have the evidence and the documentary evidence, so we have to believe this. And if the PTI is challenging that, so I hope that the government will make public, whatever evidence that they have regarding this latest claim.
I mean, now the question is, whosoever, let's suppose we admit that somebody from Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, a senior member, has met Mr. Donald Lu for an apology or for whatever reasons. Now it also depends that whether that individual met Donald Lu in the individual capacity, or was he actually representing what Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf is thinking at the moment.
I think we have to understand one thing, that whenever, the political leaders, when, they make statements, not just in Pakistan but anywhere else, you also look at it from the domestic perspective, and you also need to look at it from the international perspective. Of course, from the domestic perspective, this narrative really suits, the PTI and Imran Khan, that his government was ousted because of plan by the U.S. or the alleged plan because he wanted to pursue an independent policy. But at the same time, I'm sure that the former Prime Minister Imran Khan understands, suppose that tomorrow he gets re-elected and comes to power, he will have to work with the international community, and he cannot ignore a country like the United States. So there are always, the back channels working. So there may be a possibility that the saner voices within the PTI, they are already trying to, the damage, trying to control the damage that has already been done. Because at the end of the day, you have to understand that you cannot really antagonize, or as a matter of fact, that a country like Pakistan cannot, afford any animosity, with any country, and let alone with the United States. So I look at it this way. So there may be a possibility that some people within the PTI, they are trying to reach out to the U.S. and the Biden administration to make sure that whatever, former Prime Minister Imran Khan is saying is just maybe for domestic consumption, and suppose that if he's, re-elected, forget about it, and rest assured, he will not really, the damage, the interest of the United States. So he will be willing to, work with the United States. So I look at it this way.
Dr. you wanted to add something?
Yes, I wanted to make a small addition. We know that Mr. Abdullah Riyad, who is now the PTI's overseas, he lives in the United States, has been very influential behind the scenes in talking to the Americans. So maybe PTI is using him as a back channel to convey a certain message of reconciliation to the American government, and asking for some kind of a rapprochement, because everybody thinks, and particularly the overseas community which lives in the United States, is very upset over these allegations, and they are very concerned about the drift in the Pakistan-U.S. relations towards the negative side. So I have no evidence, but I believe that based on my personal knowledge of Mr. Abdullah Riyad's role in it, he could be used, and then it will also be convenient for the PTI to deny. A plausible deniability argument will come into play. If he goes there and they have some evidence of him meeting with Mr. Donald Lu, and they will say that he.
Sir, honestly speaking, nobody had ever even heard of this name, Donald Lu. I googled it, in fact, and then got to know about him once this name appeared. Honestly, sir, Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, for that matter. Yeah. Is he that powerful, sir, that he can change regimes in other countries, in countries like Pakistan, where 23, 24 crore people live? No.
The regime change, you have to understand this, that there was a parliamentary route to the regime change. If we are talking about big ifs, if Imran Khan would not have decided to resign from the National Assembly, en masse, when they walked out and they said that this is a conspiracy or something like that, he could have been in a position, had PTI been present in the Pakistani parliament, they would have been in a very good position to overthrow the government through a parliamentary vote. But the cardinal mistake that they made was that they did not accept the parliamentary vote, and that was the beginning of the troubles for Imran Khan, ultimately leading to his ouster. So let's not forget these facts. We all saw in front of our own eyes what was happening on the what happened on the night of April 9th and 10th, and everybody thought that this and the adamant refusal of his deputy parliamentary speaker and these people not to acknowledge the facts. So there is a measure of rationality to these moves, and when somebody is out there to destroy themselves through a no confidence move, so there is very little that the outside powers can do this. Now it's very far-fetched for them to say that these people who replaced him, which is the current dispensation of the PDM and the alliance government, and they are the stooges, and they are, what is the evidence that these people were bribed, these people were, except for the allegation which have a public resonance and which are part of the domestic politics. So I do not see any grounds whatsoever as an analyst, as a student of Pakistan's foreign policy, of any independence evidence which can be mustered, which can be also supported. And Faisal, the most important thing is that our National Security Committee met twice, and they said categorically, including the statement by DGISPR, that there is no evidence of a conspiracy being hatched, as a result of which Imran Khan government had to go.
Now, Dr. Niaz, Murtaza Saab, obviously Pakistan was a country which was told to do more. This do more mantra, it became a brand, as if we are just supposed to be there to do whatever the Americans want us to do. Attack on Haqqanis, removal of Haqqanis, doing more crackdowns, conducting more intelligence-based combing operations, and they had certain agenda as well. So certainly, and obviously whenever they asked for bases, Pakistan has given them, Pakistan has supported them. Obviously we had no other choice. And then from do more and listening to their do more and doing that do more, certainly transition takes place within a span of a few years, and certainly we get to hear this, absolutely not. Do you think, sir, this could be reversed? If this could be reversed, on what grounds? What do we need to do now? Do more to get rid of this absolutely not phenomena? How to go forward now?
Well, I mean, the do more mantra existed so long as the US was fighting a war in Afghanistan. So that phase is obviously over now. So the US is not asking us to do more in that sense. So that's why, the question of, absolutely not is also not clear to me. What are we saying absolutely not to? Because, the do more mantra, once it ends, why do we have to say absolutely not, and to what? So that absolutely not narrative also seems a concoction to me, just the way the US conspiracy theory story is also seems like a concoction to me. So now I think it's not a question of, do more or absolutely not. What this new government has to look at is, what kind of relationship are we going to have with the US? What is, the basic logic that will, the motive, interests that will drive this relationship? Because, that's what's missing on both sides, especially on the US side. It doesn't know what it wants with Pakistan, what role Pakistan can play, and what will be the basis of the relationship. And of course has a long list of things that it would want the US to do in IMF, in FATF, in terms of economic assistance, on Kashmir and so on. But then, how does it convince the US to have a relationship now that, the do more phase is over? That could have been the basis of a relationship, but then there were obviously issues with that too. But now the issue is that the USA is not asking us to do more or anything for that matter. So how do we, market us ourselves to the US to engage it and to for it to have,
Now the US is also supposed to understand that we have done enough, that do more, that era is gone. Done
that era is
enough.
gone, basically.
Look at the kind of economic losses that we have seen. Look at the number of people who died. Look at the number of people who lost their limbs during this so-called war on terror. People still are confused whether this was our war, because Khan Sahib used to say that this wasn't our war. This was a war which was imposed on us. Whereas a lot of analysts do believe that this was our war because it was in our neighborhood and we were supposed to enter into that war in one way or the other. So it was better to enter being the non-NATO ally. Niaz sahab?
Well, the thing is that the original Afghanistan war, the 1980s one, was not our war, but we got into it because of, the interests of Ziaul Haq and so on. And once we got into the 1980s war, there was, some sort of a moral, legal, political obligation on us when the second war came in 2001. So there was no way we could have said, no, we will not get involved in the Afghan war at that stage. The right time to say no was in 1980s. But then again, all that is over. Of course, a lot of people were killed, a lot of economic damage was done. But then let's also remember that, the damage that USA has caused to Pakistan is probably not even 1/10 of the damage it caused to Vietnam. But Vietnam is not harping about that damage. It's now focusing on economic issues, and it has a good economic relationship with the USA, despite all the acrimony of, the huge damage the USA caused. And that is what we have to do. Forget about the past and look at the future, what kind of a relationship we are going to have with the USA. If the USA did a lot of wrong with us, it was also partially our fault, the fault of our dictators that were always looking for you to fight the US war. But now we should not be fighting US war, we should be looking at an economic relationship.
All right. Now, if you look at the history, Kamran Sahab, let's start off from 70s onwards. There was Mr. Ayub, Mr. Yahya, Bhutto Sahab. Then Bhutto Sahab was hanged. Ziaul Haq Sahab was in power. Ziaul Haq Sahab's plane, whether it crashed or whether it was made to crash, that's still a question mark. Anyway, he also goes. The government of 1988, Pakistan People's Party comes in. In 90, PMLN comes in, or Islami Jamhuri Ittihad, as they used to call it, IJI. Then again, Benazir Bhutto, then again, Nawaz Sharif. Then Nawaz Sharif Sahab was ousted. Who came in? None other than General Pervez Musharraf. Then he had to go again. 2007, the election, 2008 was won by People's Party, and then PMLN, and then PTI. Now, sir, whenever the generals came in, I mean, in two cases, whether it was the Afghan Jihad, Ziaul Haq was there. When we were fighting the war on terror, Musharraf Sahab was there. What I'm saying is that it seems that whenever the Americans have a certain agenda or a certain kind of an objective or a goal in the region, they have always used Pakistan. Now, Afghanistan really doesn't matter to them. They used to talk about the dignity and pride of Afghan people, sir. They're not even giving them their own money back. They're not even looking after their affairs. As long as they were there, the NGOs were working, there were health facilities, there were schools, there was a system running. People were getting slightly westernized also. The youth, they were getting used to these mobile phones, internet and technology. Certainly a U-turn, sir. The narrative they were fighting against, when I say the narrative, I mean the Taliban factor. Eventually, those came back into power on the 15th of August last year, and they had to leave in haste and hurry. This is what we witnessed, and every single blame was put on Pakistan or on the previous government, because our DGSI at that time, who is currently the co-commander 11 Corps Peshawar, visited immediately after the fall of Kabul, and then, a certain narrative started developing. Khan Sahib used to say, well, this wasn't our war, and we don't even believe in wars. So don't you think everything seems to be confused, everything seems to be interconnected, interlinked in one way or the other?
I think what we have to, understand, it is easier for us to, lay the entire blame on the United States or the West. Of course, that we have talked much about how the United States really used us. But don't forget that, we were also, given the equal price. Let's look at it this way, because we always believe that we had this, the strategic location. But I believe that it's like a strategic curse. And,
I do agree, yeah.
Because the problem is, you cited the examples that whenever, that the United States said, needed us, you always had, the military rule in Pakistan. And that, of course, was a criticism even in the United States, that why, the successive U.S. administrations, really backed, military dictators in Pakistan and not necessarily the democratic governments. And because of this reason, if you see that after Musharraf's ouster, when PPP government came in, the whole idea behind this Kerry Lugar, the bill or the act was to actually provide assistance to the civilian government, provide assistance directly to the people of Pakistan to convey a message that, the United States not necessarily really, all the time supporting, the military dictators in Pakistan. But of course, that didn't work either. But I think what we have to, understand, we need to look inward now. I think, the U.S. is a superpower. They have the huge economy. They have the huge resources. They can commit as many blunders they can. They spent over, $2 trillion in Afghanistan, and they get away with it. They can afford it. But we cannot afford it. I think we need to, now form a policy where we should look, put our house in order and focus on the economy. And instead of just being rhetorical and trying to, make hollow claims of, achieving sovereignty and all these kind of stuffs, we need to really work hard and, address our internal shortcomings. And then, we are in a situation where we can, of course, assert ourselves. At the moment, I think, again, I would say, whatever happened. It's history now. We have to, cannot undo the history. But certainly, we can learn from the history. The problem is that we are not learning from the history, because when we, blame others for our own ills, then, of course, some or the other, we put the real issues at the back burner. And I think we, take a new look and revisit even our strategy as well, instead of all the time blaming others.
I mean, we need to put our own house in order. Now, that's a very, very tricky question, sir. Yes, economic factor is a huge factor, but there's a lot more that we need to do, sir. I mean, if you switch on any television channel, whether private or the state, one party is bashing the other, and then the others are bashing that party. I still fail to understand that who is responsible for our own economic failures. Today, Hamza Shahbaz Saab was saying that, it's not a matter of this particular government. This has been going on for the last 73 years, 74, or maybe 75 years. And I was just thinking that who has ruled Pakistan during those 75 years? How many times PMLN has been in power? How many times Pakistan People's Party has been in power, or IGI, or military rulers? Whenever the military ruler comes in, he has to have the support of the judiciary to implement their ideas. Whether it was Ziaul Haq or it was General Musharraf, sir, we all know that they came, they saw, and they conquered, Interestingly, and why do we talk about democracy? Why do we talk about political will? Whom are we referring to? Whom are we talking with? Because same people, most of these times they change their political parties. Sometimes they're independent. What have they done so far? I mean, this is a question that keeps on brewing in my mind.
Well, Faisal, in terms of holding the ruling elite responsible for Pakistan's ills, I think that's a key focus. Regardless of whether you had civilian leaders or you had military leaders, all of them contributed their bit to our current situation, which is Pakistan is one of the most highly indebted countries of the world. You know, our foreign loans and, you know, that's eating up about 80% of our GDP. So how a country on earth is able to survive when you have that kind of an outstanding...
So the way we are surviving, get more loans.
No, but how long will it continue?
Sir, for the last 75 years, if this has been going on.
Faisal, you have to realize that our foreign
Sir,
policy...
who is going to... I'm not the decision maker.
No,
Neither are you, sir.
no,
The people sitting in the parliament, the people who rule. First of all, I don't agree with this word Hukamrani. That is something, you know, as if we are the Riaya and somebody is ruling us as a king or a queen.
No,
but the question is, sir, that at least it has to be a collective effort.
Yes, it has to be a collective effort, but for that you need to have legitimate governments in power. So whenever...
Not even one single prime minister has completed his tenure or her tenure in this country.
But, you know, the only fair elections, the consensus is there, only fair and free elections was the 1970 elections. But after that, every election has been either maneuvered or has been manipulated to get, you know, their
desired output.
So unless and until we are able to evolve a legitimate political order and political dispensation, there is no hope for Pakistan. And a government that gets elected by the people and goes out by people's vote is a necessary condition for democracy to function in Pakistan.
Well, sir, let's hope and pray. Whatever happens at the end of the day, the common man should be benefited. It has taken 75 years so far. I hope not another 75, sir. But anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for your time. And thank you very much, Dr. Niaz Murtaza Saab, for your time as well. And I would also like to thank our very dear friend Kamran Yousaf for his participation in our program as well. So that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you inshallah tomorrow at 8:05 p.m. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.